Welcome to this faculty interview with Professor Lester Olson. He's going to talk to us today a little bit about visual rhetoric. He's going to begin with some of his landmark work on Rosie the Riveter.
It turns out it was a team-building gesture that men and women alike would do at rallies at Westinghouse. And it could not possibly have been used to recruit women into the factories in World War II because you actually had to be a factory worker to see it. It's a small detail, but if you look at the little badge on her collar, that was actually an identification badge that made it possible for her to get onto the factory floor. So you had to be wearing that badge in order to see this image. You had to actually be on the factory floor over in what today is Turtle Creek. The records from the Union at that time are held over in Point Park, or at Point Breeze.
Point Breeze, yeah.
Point Breeze.
Okay, yeah.
And it's sort of interesting because we can do it. You know, who is the we and what is it that they're doing? Well, we know that they're not riveting. And the we at that time, the highest paid woman was paid less than the lowest paid man because of gender values at the time. So, and she's trying to be feminine. You know, she has her fingernail polish and her mascara. She has on a bandana tied in a fairly feminine way. And so there's all this concern about still being womanly while working in a factory.
Right. And I remember that your work with
Jim Kimball,
on that artifact was picked up by Wikipedia.
It was. It made the main page for Wikipedia for a day.
And they, if I remember correctly, the Wikipedia editors cited it as key scholarship that informed the page, right, for Rosie.
They did. Yeah, they said that what we did was we stripped away a lot of misconceptions, that there were so many inaccuracies that had accumulated over the years about what this image did and what it meant,
right,
that our article had really shaken things up in terms of correcting the record.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean it can't be used today in different ways. I mean, part of what's interesting from a rhetoric standpoint is meaning is contingent. It's very historically situated. It's situated in terms of a set of relationships.
Right.
So sometime after we wrote that article, there was a women's studies scholar, and I've affiliated with women's studies for 25 years now myself. There was a women's studies scholar who, having read our work, said, you know, it really changed how she viewed it because she had it up in terms of women's empowerment. And you can still use it for that today. There's no reason why you can't. It's just not historically what the image was designed to do.
Right.
And it wasn't designed to recruit women into the workforce because they had to already be workers to see it. It wasn't a Rosie the Riveter, you know, because as I said, they didn't do riveting over at Westinghouse in those days.
Right.
There's only around 1,000 copies of it that were made. So if you own an original, it's worth a great deal.
Wow.
There are all kinds of spoofs on it. You know, the W for Westinghouse has been made into the W for George W. Bush, and there's a version with the face being George W. Bush's face, saying, "You know, ketchup boy, can't, you know, don't have guns like these," and they're messing with his grammar because his grammar as president was so awful, and having a great deal of fun doing a spoof with W. There's also been a kind of not necessarily noticed cultural struggle over the image because these days it appears on aprons and oven mitts and the like. And of course, the whole idea was women were in a factory setting, not a domestic setting, and that whole sense of domesticating the image and putting it back in the home and back in the kitchen. So that's just one example of a sort of visual rhetoric project.
It strikes me that when students go back home, the undergraduate majors, or soon-to-be majors, hopefully, and talk about what they're studying, that visual rhetoric might be a great opportunity for them to pick up an artifact in their house, right?
It is.
And say, here's an example of a way that you can gain a perspective on understanding the visual artifact in a way that their family and friends might understand.
Exactly, and in fact, that's one of the really attractive reasons for, you know, why people study visual rhetoric. It's made it possible to go back and include all sorts of histories that have been neglected. So you'll have cultures that are predominantly visual cultures, where they have murals and the like, and we can access how people were persuading in those kinds of contexts. Or you'll have groups who, you know, they didn't have access to the public platform as featured speakers that people would notice. in quite the same way, in terms of the classical traditional emphasis on presidents and leaders in assemblies and the like. But we can go back and we can look at the objects that people used. There are examples in the 19th century where women would make a quilt where, with symbols on it that represented a party different than their husbands, that sort of thing. So those mundane objects that people have around, sometimes for sentimental reasons, are rich in their symbolic uses in terms of a kind of, it's sometimes called a rhetoric of display, where people will put around them images of their identity or their work. In a sense, that's what I've done with this office, by having the images up that I've worked with or that I've worked on. The other two images were the two books I did on visual rhetoric early on in my career. The one on Emblems of American Community came out in 1992. And it was really a groundbreaking book. It did all kinds of innovative work that people have been really imitating and emulating since then.
And published by Smithsonian, right?
Published by
that's
Smithsonian
so
Institution
interesting.
Press.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then this one,
and
more
then
recently.
the Franklin book, that actually grew out of the book on emblems, and it came out in 2004 with the University of South Carolina Press. It's kind of, when you look at that image, it looks like the main contest is between the woman and the leopard, which it is. The woman represents France with the fleur-de-lis on the shield, and the leopard represents Britain. So when the publisher was preparing the design for the cover, they considered putting the title over the infant Hercules.
Oh my!
Infant Hercules strangling the two
That was
serpents.
the proof?
Yes.
Oh!
Yeah.
Do you still have it? Do you still have the proof? That's great.
I probably do, because I do tend to keep stuff like that.
That's wonderful.
But they wanted to put the title over the infant Hercules, which was what the book was about, was the birthing of the new nation,
right?
And so founding as an infant Hercules.
So that's great. So there's two sole-authored books on parts of visual rhetoric, and then the co-edited anthology that's used actually as is it the textbook in the visual rhetoric undergraduate course?
Yeah.
Right. So if the students, if they like that introductory reading that they did for today, and are intrigued by the things that you're talking about here, taking that class down the road would be a great opportunity to continue exploring this particular aspect of
Absolutely. Absolutely. It would work out quite nicely along those lines. And the students in there have done some truly amazing projects that have been helpful for them in getting ahead, going to graduate school and the like. In fact, I just had an email from a student who was thrilled because the senior thesis she did with me to follow up on her visual rhetoric project, it focused on the memorial to the Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King on the Mall, and the huge controversy over it. You might know that it was a Chinese sculptor who designed it. There was a controversy over recognizing the individual on the Mall. There was a controversy over why Martin Luther King rather than the many, many other people, some of whom lost their lives also, working to advance the rights of the civil rights and the human rights of black people in the United States. And she did such a fine job that she went on, and she was so enthused, she did a senior thesis, and she just got into graduate school.
That's great.
The paper she wrote was such a substantive, worthwhile paper.
Talk a little bit more about that, the senior thesis. How is that an option for a student, and how does it work?
Well, a lot of students don't really take advantage of it, and I will own that I only tend to do it when a student has really performed well in the class. It's something that enables them to build on a project they've already done in an upper level class. It helps them prepare to go to graduate school to do more advanced work, because it usually consists of 3 to 5 chapters rather than just a single essay that are all connected to develop a thesis. So it helps prepare them to write a master's thesis or a doctoral dissertation if they're thinking about graduate school.
And do we have credit for it? Is it done outside of the credit?
It is. You get 3 credits.
You get 3 credits. So it's actually a course. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've done quite a few of them over the years, although I don't do that. I do a lot of them because the student really does have to show that he or she is thoroughly engaged, and it's a marvelous project. Some of the students have also gotten prizes in statewide writing competitions. I had a student who wrote on Picasso's Guernica, who took a place in the Pennsylvania Communication Association's writing competition as an undergraduate.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that builds your credentials if you're thinking about going to law school or graduate school or any kind of job, because it suggests that in a statewide competition you were successful.
The other thing I like about it is that it really illustrates opportunities for students in a humanities discipline like communication to do research as an undergraduate. Right?
Exactly. And I've had a student, one of my students, and it's a bit delicate, it might make people a bit uncomfortable, but to think about how the body of a person changes in the aftermath of breast cancer and being a breast cancer survivor. I had a student whose imagination was touched by Audre Lorde, who chose not to conceal the fact that she had had breast cancer and had surgery for it. And she did such a fine job on the differences in terms of the visual presentation of the bodily self that she took a place in the writing competition by the Women's Studies writing competition.
That's great.
Here. It tends to attract really hardworking, bright students who do incredibly creative projects, some of which are connected to the Pittsburgh area, like the Terrible Towel, for example.
Right.
And there are all kinds of opportunities around Pittsburgh to draw on visual works. The Carnegie Museum's across the street. The Stephen Foster Memorial has sheet music that has representations of race and women and the like, if the student's interested in that.
And then the north side, too. Mattress Factory.
The Mattress Factory and
Warhol
the Warhol.
City of Asylum, actually, down there.
Yeah. I had a student who was interested in the Super Bowl trophy and the Heisman Trophy, or the sports museum, the Heinz History Center.
Right.
So, Pittsburgh has an incredibly rich visual culture that students can find projects to work on as well.
Right. Well, that's fantastic. Lester, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with the students, and I'm sure that they're going to be interested in keeping track of the course offerings down the road for the possibility of taking an advanced course in visual rhetoric.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's a pretty exciting area of study. I'm keenly enthusiastic about it, and I continue to produce essays and do substantial work in the area, and it's something I think that students can really find enriches their daily life. It's not just something that builds your credentials, but in your day-to-day living, suddenly people actually see the world around them with greater sophistication.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.